Hey y'all, I know this isn't the usual upload here, but this is a video the Anime Misfit and I worked quite a bit on. We didn't quite have the chance to put this on her channel, so I asked her to post it here if I could, and she said yes. What I'm saying is please go check out the Anime Misfit. She's an awesome creator and lovely person who deserves a lot more views than she gets. Also an amazing streamer, and I'll leave a link to her Twitch channel and her YouTube channel in the description below. I also help her edit some of her videos, but that's only partly relevant here. Here is our presentation of Star Wars Visions. But yeah, I'm still a noob to Star Wars, so I try my best. So what happens when you give 7 major anime studios the idea of Star Wars and tell them, hey, make us some short films, do it! You get... Also, pardon this whole situation, I have my camera over there somewhere, but I lost my memory card reader, so we're gonna have to do this with the webcam for now. Please bear with me. Now, I usually have some kind of highfalutin intro about this kind of thing, but I want to do it this way because I want to be very clear about something. I am a very casual Star Wars fan. Very casual. I have watched the first 6 films in the correct order, fight me, and I haven't read any of the comics or I haven't done any of the expanded universe stuff. So I'm coming at this from a pretty plain perspective, but that also kind of gives me a certain amount of neutrality. So I'm rating these in tier system from the, if I'm pointing right, S to, but no lower than D, because none of these are failures, and I'm rating them on story alone. If we were to talk about the animation style and why one's better than the other, we would be here all day. So for now, let's just go through what I think are the best and worst ones in ascending order. We're starting with the worst ones that I rank D, which is only I think 1 or 2 of them. But these are not like the worst thing I've ever seen. I am rating them only within the confines of Star Wars Visions, not against any other anime in existence or any of the anime that the studios may have made otherwise. So, without further ado, the list. I honestly didn't get this one's story nearly as well, and hopefully I'm not making anyone too mad by putting this at the lowest category of tiers. It's just confusing. But after talking with Misfit about it, it makes more sense now. It doesn't detract from the fact that the pacing is a bit wonky, but anyway, I had the idea of this one. It's not focusing on the Jedi versus Sith thing and showing a small journey of a rock band in the Star Wars universe. I infer the protagonist is a Jedi of sorts, but not a strict good versus bad duality kind of Jedi. The flashback at the beginning vaguely sets up the friendship between the singer and the slug guy, but it really could have done with more elaboration, even a little bit. And jumping back to it occasionally in the short doesn't really help much in clarifying it, although originally I wrote that as a future flashback or what happened post-apocalyptic, whatever. But in this case it makes more sense that it's actually in the past, and it's actually kind of a cool touch to see the lightsaber turned microphone, which I'm assuming that's what it was. The band as a group is actually rather likable, if a bit one note, pun intended. Didn't know there were 3 torsoed beings in the Star Wars universe. The band feels like a family, a theme that is emphasized quite well when Boba T kidnaps the slug guitarist guy for Jabba the Hutt as stock, and the rest of the band goes to join the slug to support them, even if it means they all die. But they don't because of a high persuasion roll from the singer calling Jabba out after playing in a okay rock song. I'm not gonna pick on the music here since I couldn't sing on a good day to save my life and the song slaps relatively well. All this is to say that the short is entertaining and themes are solid, friendship and family. Courage in the face of impossible odds, that is a bit underwhelming due to the not so good pacing. I have the colorful art style and the voice acting is very well done. The action scenes, albeit brief, are simple and effective. The short feels just less saturated than it could have been if I could use a metaphor like that. I wouldn't want to rush to buy their album though, maybe listen to it on the Star Wars equivalent of Spotify. I'm gonna give this one a solid pass, 5 out of 10, but it's for a few reasons. It's a good self-contained story that does little too much talking for me. The Jedi and his Padawan are drawn to a planet by a dark disturbance that isn't Sith, and find out it's an old Sith Lord in hiding, or more like self-imposed wandering? This takes place apparently a long time after the Empire existed in the Star Wars universe and the Sith are basically gone. Padawan almost dies and the Master comes in to save the day. Sounds relatively simple, but it takes place over several long conversations, a fair chunk of which remind the viewer about the Padawan being a bit hot-headed, the other only which sometimes help add flavor text to the setting, like about the village and how they're shy and how they don't want people to come in if we even see a village, because we really don't see anything more than like 5 people in the village. Kudos to the brief chat gap between the Elder Sith and the Padawan, though. It implies a lot has happened in a story prior to our viewing, and it does so in surprisingly few amount of sentences. So good dialogue sometimes, but mostly unnecessary. And speaking of words, and this is probably also being petty, the English dubbing had a weird, awkward pause at times. I don't know if this is from the translation issue or just reading the thing. It, more than the few lines, had a gap in delivery that felt kind of odd. I like the art direction here, if I can call it that. Is that the right term? But while we see very few people, I like how they focuses on the people and not the background. The background seems to be almost plain and washed out, but the people are detailed and very in the foreground in your attention. The backgrounds are intricate when they need to be, but most of it is still good, mind you. And the rocks and greenery in the foreground and dark sky in the background, you know, all that's nice color schemes. It's a very nice, good use of color scheme and guiding the eye. And even if I think most of the conversations weren't all that helpful, they do build a subtle sense of character and connection between the protagonist and the setting of the film and its people. Also, I love the Jedi Master's hair. I want such volume. This one is an all-around great story that is just enough Star Wars, but again could be removed from the Star Wars universe and still be a good, if not excellent story if you replaced Force with magic and samurai skills, which I understand the whole Star Wars samurai inspiration. I actually like the way they designed the story. It's sort of muted, both in design of the characters, the art, the flat colors, and in the story itself. It isn't really much, it's a bit of a slow burn, which is a good thing in this case. It lets you build into the world of this short story. And that can work sometimes. Also, I like how the Force in this case is not just accessible by Jedi, because it's actually more of a magic spiritual life force thing that is hinted at by the aforementioned village bride and her husband, able to see the planet's memories by accessing the spirit stone with the chant. I found that really cool as an idea if like the Force wasn't midichlorian based and instead you can actually just like sense it and work with it, which includes a Force speed, light speed step that I've never heard of until now. I've seen Force jumping and lightning, but I don't know, maybe that's the thing. But this being a bit of a slow burn is also kind of against it, because the characters, while likable enough and serviceable for the story, really lack any kind of personality beyond just hero or protagonist and their friend, and then the damsel in distress, and then the bad guy who is so comically evil, it's just delicious. The conflict actually comes mostly from the setup in one big scene, which it's kind of a cool touch to see a Star Wars-ish story only have one scene of combat that's very decisive and quick versus having it drawn out the entire time. One fight and the whole thing's done. Nice and simple. I'll admit, the world doesn't have much depth though. I actually want to know more about the village and the people and the way they had their practice of the feeling of the Force, or what they call it anyway. And I know they don't have time to go into it, all of it, but it seems a bit literally flat when it comes to that. It helps to keep the story pace going, and in that way I definitely enjoyed it. It's a nice, easy watch, and a good moral lesson of one should not stay detached for too long, or else you might lose your hand from the gun you're holding. Wait, no, that's not what Confucius said, was it? I love the fact that they use this one as the ending episode. Most of the films in here have really relatively happy or neutral endings, but this one is so, whew, it's a slap in the face. It basically says, no, all those good endings, nah, we're ending it with this one. It ain't perfect, and I love that. It's also a good example of foreshadowing writing. Seeing the scene with the protagonist in the dream kills someone from the start, and we finally see at the end who it was. It was his lover, technically, in the end. I love the setup of that right from the beginning and how it's just a satisfying payoff and such a key event in the short film. Again, I wish this wasn't a Star Wars thing. I barely saw lightsabers. I saw maybe a bit of them, sure, but the princess uses a crossbow. They use a map once, and otherwise they use animals to ride, and I'm saying that while it's fine as a Star Wars short, I don't think it helps. Let's put it that way. This is the studio behind the Devilman Crybaby movie, and it does make the characters look definitely distinct to their style. The cartoonish way their body is shaped is fascinating to watch. Although, ironically, there's not much else going on. A lot of it's coming down to 4 characters and just very basic scenery, which, again, good for guiding the pace, but almost too basic. The action's very slow. A lot of the motions are fairly simple until it comes to fighting. It's fairly minimal overall. Good and bad. The voice acting, though, was actually quite good, especially for the main character. For some reason, I fell in love with his voice. I don't know why. The main samurai's voice is just, I don't know, maybe it's the accent. Is there an accent there? And the tour guides in this one stole the show. They are the most human part of the whole thing. They felt more human than most of the rest of the cast, which is to say that the rest of the cast felt empty or more like tropes than characters. Functional, albeit just really hard to get invested in. Honestly, not too much to say about this one. It's just a good metaphor of how the Force can be turned against the Jedi in times of need or in times of things they didn't think about. So maybe consider that in the future, huh? Jedi may make some backup plans there. Yo, Astro Boy up in this. In the sense of Studio Trigger having a certain je ne sais quoi, the influence of Astro Boy from this artist is definitely shown through here. It's an homage, and the smoother, bubbly style of animation, for lack of a better word, is a refreshing sight for the more serious Star Wars universe. It's also nice to see robots being Jedi, since I only recall a few that even show up from what I've seen, a Grievous aside. Maybe it's dependent on their level of sentience, but I don't know the rules about that one. It's nice to see animators also changing the style in flashbacks, like when they go to like a different animation style for like the chalkboard kind of style for the obvious fantasy. It's something I've seen now and again, but it's just like a nice childlike touch to wonder, which Toby is a child, so it makes sense. Okay, art note over. The pacing of this one is wonky. Toby, the robot, is called to be a Jedi through his dreams, and the creator, a Jedi who doesn't tell him he's a Jedi, is saying he's dangerous. He tells Toby to go search for the crystal all over for a while, doesn't find anything, and then Toby just hits buttons on a ship and calls the Sith to their location. Those darn kids. But then this leads to, of course, Toby having to fight said Jedi, and Toby finds out the crystal was inside himself all along. Literally inside his chest. The speed of the events of the Sith coming down to the planet, Toby's creator dying, and then Toby killing the Sith Lord is a bit too fast, in my opinion. Like, I understand what happened, but it was a really fast jump between creator dying and Toby awakening to Force and then winning. You think the robot would be more concerned with the creator's work of making life grow on a dead planet, but Toby is quite young in mind. I mean, they are a kid robot, but they do find ways to grow plants, and they vow to bring it to other planets in the solar system, or universe, which is a good story touch, because not only does that imply there's more to this story that could be, but also that the character does not focus just on themselves at the end. It's more of an open-ended story, which doesn't necessarily help you be too bookmark or self-contained, but it's still nice to see a character do that. And that fight scene, yo, sick movement both in the camera, if I can call it that, and robot contortion. This did boost the episode up a few points, I'm gonna be honest, but it is only a few points, and even then some of the angles and some of the shots can be a bit disorienting. Wait, was the Kyber crystal in Toby powering him? It's like in the lightsaber, does Toby eventually power it down, or is it just a focus thing? Is Toby powered by the Force? Okay, right off the bat, I love the setup for this one. Jedi are gathering from distant places after the Order of Jedi is supposedly destroyed, and are waiting for new lightsabers to be made so they can make a new order. The implications of that scene alone are so heavy and distant in the future that I actually like the way they imply that, again, with one main conversation, which also draws out over a bit too long later on in the short, but I at least get that they're right up front with it. Very nice. This one also has a very interesting protagonist, the daughter of the Sabersmith, who is a Jedi, and she's also kind of a Jedi, and she's also a walking MacGuffin carrying the other MacGuffins. We don't get told much of her past, but her actions alone illustrate her personality and drive in a way that I don't think you could write unless you wrote a whole, 10 pages. It's showing over telling, and it's really cool. There's no jumps in pacing in this one, since we actually get to follow her through the journey, through a relatively short journey, and the surprising twist that caught me off guard at the end. It's not necessarily the most engaging story outside of the protagonist, but the implications of what could have been transpired before now is enticing. A note on the animation, it's detailed where it needs to be and easy on the eyes. Considering the studio made Blood Plus and XXX Holic, or at least worked on them, motion of the characters, especially in this fight scene, shows that style. I'm seeing it now, I can see some Blood Plus in there. This short focuses a lot on the twists in the story and how that comes across to the viewer, which I'll admit is a bit weak. Even after the big twist is revealed, it doesn't really play out in a way that's satisfying, especially that guy with the purple lightsaber. Apparently he was just not quite evil, but was evil. Apparently he was just going crazy for a while, so whatever. So while this one does definitely have a solid amount of work put into it and a good amount of writing and character show, it's not quite satisfying enough for me to like it more than just that. A lot is implied at the end, though, and the scale is still definitely set to a large size. We see what we need to see, and it's left open for us to wonder what happens at the end. Also, the person who the Jedi, well, mostly Sith, were supposed to meet isn't too imposing as far as an old Jedi Master is concerned, but then again, Yoda was not imposing and he can still kick butt, so I don't know about that one. Wait, IG did Chevalier d'Aeon? Yeah, that show is tight. This one is, I didn't know it was the JoJo's, the early JoJo arcs studio at first, and it kind of shows now that I'm seeing it. The hand-drawn style, the Sin City style, if I can call it, that aesthetic is nice and really helps to highlight the important scenes when they need to happen. It always makes a piece easier to digest, and I appreciate that. The story is simple enough. Wandering Loner comes to town in time for a bandit raid. Wanderer turns out to be a badass, and along with the village's help, fends off or defeats the bandits. In this case, he defeats the leader, and the village takes care of the rest. And like several of these short films, it is set in a feudal Japan in the old days, or at least similar to that in the dystopian future. It calls to my film school roots and definitely the historical films we watched before. This one is solid, tried and true. It's always nice to see a self-contained story like this, and you don't even have to know that much about Star Wars. Yeah, there's a red lightsaber, that usually means Sith, and it's a cool twist to see that the protagonist is actually implied to have at least been a Sith, or is a Sith. But the expressions on the faces of the antagonists and townsfolk get that across equally well. You can actually have this without dialogue at all, and I would still get the point, and that means it's just very good planning, if not at least design. I mean, you could show this to someone without any kind of Star Wars knowledge and they probably get the same message from this. I can't say it's innovative, it's definitely appreciated though. The other flaw is that the shades of gray make some of the scenes a bit blurry, like on purpose of course, but like hard to tell details when I really kind of wish I did see details, although I imagine that eased the workload a bit. The voice acting is also quite nice, and the camera movements are mostly static, but they're fluid when they need to be. Especially the zoom shot of the waterfall, that was really cool. I don't know how one does that with animation, it's just really magical. This seems to use more low or at least neutral shots, maybe a wider perspective shot, in order to show that not everything quite here is good or bad, everything just seems kind of neutral. There's no good guy, there's no winning, it just is. Not the hero you want, it's the hero you're getting in the situation, and honestly, you can't ask for much more in the world of Star Wars. Also another example of how if the hero, or protagonist in this case, does not have a droid to save the butt of him and the people, then he wouldn't get anywhere. This one is an example of how an anime studio can take an idea and really make it their own thing. You can tell this one is a studio trigger piece, and it shows in both writing and aesthetic. I like how it approaches the idea of the dark side by creating a veritable Vader twin set, collect them all now, and how the idea of good and evil cannot be programmed into your genes. How supposedly experimental Sith Lords can still choose the side of good even if it doesn't quite make them a Jedi. This one does a good job of self-contained conflict that uses siblings, a sibling rivalry, to mirror light and dark conflict and uses both to move the story smoothly. And of course it ends with the male twin using a hyperdrive to slice a Star Destroyer in half while in space with no spacesuit, but that's expected here. I have a few nitpicks, if anything. One of them is that it hardly feels like a Star Wars story. I know there's a light and dark side, and the color coding does a very good job of that. From a film perspective, like a film major perspective, the color and lighting, so good. But this could be a space fantasy anime on its own, and it would be just as valid. It also feels a bit rushed towards the end, but that's compensated by a satisfying over-the-top ending. The only one is in this entire series, I should say. Like, none of the other ones ever come close to that big of a bang at the end. Again, the droid is basically the only reason the hero wins, but it also isn't the only reason they win, unlike the duel. But back on point, it implies that the characters aren't done necessarily, and if this were to be a main series, there would be more, but of course this is a short film, so it only has one episode, but it feels like one that could fit at the beginning of a long season that I would definitely watch, especially because they would have to one-up that ending scene. It's a much more exciting approach to a self-contained story though, and definitely more satisfying. I'd be remiss if I didn't at least note the cool designs of the armor they made, like the custom Vader armor, that stuff. I love it. I like the design of that. It's about time someone redid Vader and gave him some fashion, even if it's a little bit more like simplified curves. I dig it. Yes, this is partly here because of the protagonist. They knew exactly what they were doing. I put it at the top because from story alone, this one especially would have worked without Star Wars entirely, and I would have liked it actually much more if they had not. I love this one for the character acting and the writing of how they just come across in scene. Not just Lop, but her father and Ocho. They're portrayed with passion and intensity through voice acting more than any action on screen. The bond they have as family is very clearly illustrated at the beginning and is kept present both in good and bad ways throughout the entire story. It's a very consistent line. The whole story is so self-contained and written so well that I just loved it from the second it started. The protagonist, of course, being taken from a position of misfortune, aka Aladdin, and then brought to a better position of greater fortune, but with a certain amount of cost. That's a really cool theme. It's been used before, but not too often. But you feel for her struggle because of how it's portrayed. It's not just a throwaway note. It's just her. Aesthetically, it's practically a stage play, and is it just me, or I can see more than a few kabuki elements in it? Although maybe that's probably just me. I love kabuki. The story is just long enough to make an impact that lasts, and honestly, I don't know if it'll hold up as a longer series, or a longer, maybe like 30-minute episode. I think the shortness of this one actually gives it that oomph it needs, although I would still watch if it was a longer season anyway. And of course, the very clear inspiration of samurai Star Wars with the whole sword hilt thing, ceremony, and all that. It is a huge homage to that, of course, which, yes, I get that. Actually, I don't know, it's overt and fitting at the same time. The animation, to note, is not as fluid as other on the list, like Toby is still being the best here, but there's still great details. Like, look at the eyes. Not just even Lop's eyes, but the character's eyes, the details on the clothes, the shrine. There's so much heart put into this alone. It may not be a feast necessarily for the eyes, but it's definitely a good mouthful. If they had ended the series with this though, I think it would have been too perfect. Hence why they ended with Akakiri with the whole slap to the face. But that's, you know, I appreciate that. Bittersweet helps you appreciate the coffee more. It's done. I did the list. There's the list. Right there. Now, regardless of what I said in this entire thing, I want to make it clear. Every short film in this thing is a great creative project and a great twist on the idea of Star Wars. If nothing else, I applaud these anime studios for making these short films in their own distinct way, and I think it really works as a nice, like, Star Wars, technically expanded universe. So it's really good. I like this project, and I think it's worth paying for a month of Disney Plus if you wanted to watch this show. I'm not shilling for the Mouse Overlord by any means of the word, but if you, I think it's worth paying for it. Just have your friends see it, or you can just, So, but in the meantime, if you don't agree with my comments, and I'm sure not all of you do, but let me know in the comments what you really think about what I said, or what the Star Wars shorts meant to you. And if you're angry about it, that's understandable, because anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. Suffering leads to the dark side. And I did it again. You know, I wanted to hold you throughout the entire video, but it'd be kind of difficult to hold both of you at the same time. But you're cute. What? It's cute. It's an Eevee. Go to Build-A-Bear. I'm sure they still exist, hopefully, by the time you're watching this video.